Okay, so let's get right into this Project 2025 thing.
Yeah.
We've got this this mandate for leadership document that folks have sent over. And wow, there's a lot in here.
It's dense.
It is very dense. But we're going to try to extract the parts that are relevant to this Project 2025.
Yeah.
And really kind of focus on what people are saying about the potential problems.
Right. And it is interesting you say people are saying about the problems, because there are a lot of different groups with a lot of different criticisms.
Yeah.
Because the scope of this Project 2025 is so vast.
Right.
It really does read like a blueprint for a complete takeover.
Like a hostile takeover almost.
Yeah.
Of the entire U.S. government.
Shifting its direction completely.
Yeah, and they're very openly comparing this to Reagan's 1981 mandate for leadership. Like they're trying to kind of like recapture that.
That's right. It's that same energy of like sweeping change, but this time with a very particular agenda.
Okay, so what are some of the things that are, I guess, the biggest red flags?
Well, one of the things that really jumps out is their language about executive power.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they explicitly call for using it aggressively to reshape the bureaucracy.
Like how aggressively are we talking?
They actually use the phrase bend or break.
Bend or break, wow.
Which is a pretty like confrontational way to put it. It doesn't really sound like they're interested in collaboration.
So what does bend or break the bureaucracy actually look like?
Well, they're talking about shrinking or even eliminating entire departments.
Like what?
The Department of Homeland Security is one that they specifically mention.
Wow.
So you can imagine the fallout from that, right?
Yeah.
Massive job losses, confusion over who's responsible for what.
Gaps in security.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Potentially real gaps.
Not to mention what that does to morale.
Oh, of course.
For the people who are working in those agencies.
Absolutely. It just creates this atmosphere of instability and uncertainty. And not just for the government workforce, but for everyone who depends on those services, those essential services.
Then there's this whole family values push.
Yeah.
Which has raised a lot of eyebrows.
Yeah.
Because critics are saying that it's kind of a step backward. And could lead to discrimination.
It's a valid concern.
Against people who don't fit their definition of family.
Yeah. They talk about using federal power, including the tax code, to promote traditional family structures.
Right.
But they're incredibly vague about what that means.
So critics are saying that it could be used against single parents.
Potentially.
Same-sex couples.
Yeah.
Really anyone who doesn't fit their kind of narrow definition.
That's the worry. Yeah.
Okay, so then of course there's the big one, their stance on science.
Yeah, particularly climate change.
Climate change, right?
This is another area where they're facing a lot of pushback from experts.
From experts, right?
Yeah, they're calling for defunding climate change research.
Wow.
And they even suggest refusing to accept the findings.
Like just completely disregarding.
Disregarding the science.
Yeah.
Which obviously goes against the overwhelming consensus.
Yeah.
And raises serious concerns about their commitment to evidence-based policymaking.
Right.
If you can even call it that.
So that's pretty bold, to say the least.
It is.
And something that could have huge consequences for environmental policy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And public health. You can't just ignore that.
And then there's the social side of things, right?
Yeah.
Their approach to things like abortion and sex education are also causing a stir.
For sure. They're advocating for restricting access to abortion and promoting abstinence-only sex education.
Okay.
Which, again, is in a direct opposition to the views of many medical professionals and reproductive rights advocates.
Right. They're saying these policies are harmful.
Yeah.
And ineffective.
They don't work.
So we're seeing potential conflicts with experts in science, in healthcare and education. It sounds like this plan is already facing some major pushback. But what about the more practical stuff? Like, how are they going to pay for all of this?
Right, the money.
The money.
That's the big question that critics are raising.
Yeah.
Because the scale of the proposed changes
is huge.
It's massive.
Yeah.
The departmental overhauls the military, build up the changes to social programs.
It's going to cost a lot of money.
It would require a huge influx of funding and personnel.
Yeah.
So where's the money coming from?
Right.
And can they realistically attract and retain qualified people?
Especially given their very specific ideological stance.
Exactly. It's a big unknown.
It's one thing to have a vision, right? But it's another thing entirely to actually make it happen.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about making it happen.
Okay.
Let's talk about the potential impact on everyday Americans.
Right, the people.
The people. I imagine these changes wouldn't exactly be subtle.
No, they'd be felt by pretty much everyone in every area of life.
So Project 2025's reach is so broad, it would touch virtually every aspect of American life.
We're talking economic impacts, social impacts, environmental impact.
Okay, so let's break those down a bit.
Okay.
What are we talking about when we say economic impact?
Well, they're calling for huge shifts in spending and deregulation,
Okay.
which could send shockwaves through the economy.
Like, what do you mean?
Certain sectors could see a boom while others struggle to survive.
So, for example, if they drastically shrink the Department of Education
Right.
and implement a voucher system, what happens to all the teachers and staff in public schools?
Exactly.
Where do those jobs go?
That's exactly the kind of ripple effect that critics are worried about. And it's not just jobs.
Right.
Think about the impact on housing prices, local businesses, entire communities.
Who depend on those jobs?
Exactly. It's like a domino effect.
It's a domino effect.
And one that's incredibly difficult to predict.
Right. And then there's the social implications, which we've already touched on a little bit.
Right.
This push for traditional family values. Their stance on things like abortion and sex ed.
This is going to have a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. We're talking about potentially limiting access to healthcare, reproductive rights, even basic social services.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of how these policies would actually be enforced.
Right. Like, would there be like a morality police?
Well, critics are worried about that.
Yeah.
They're worried about the potential for discrimination and intrusion into people's private lives.
Right. It sounds like a recipe for unrest and legal challenges.
It could be.
And we can't forget about the environmental consequences of their skepticism toward climate change.
That's right. Critics are sounding the alarm bells on that one too.
Yeah.
Because rolling back environmental regulations
Right.
and dismissing climate science
Yeah.
could have devastating consequences for the planet and public health.
So potentially negative impacts across the board.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like Project 2025 is offering many alternative solutions.
That's one of the biggest criticisms. It's very much a my way or the highway kind of approach.
There's not much room for compromise or consideration of different viewpoints.
Which in a country as diverse as the U.S.
Right.
seems like a recipe for division and gridlock.
It's definitely a valid concern
Yeah.
and one that we need to dig into deeper as we continue to look at this document.
Yeah, it really does feel like they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Right.
You've got this incredibly diverse nation
Yeah.
with all these different values and priorities.
Right.
And this plan just seems to be pushing one very specific, and some might say narrow, agenda.
It's like they're gambling that everyone's just going to fall in line with this vision. But what about the people who don't? What about the people who stand to lose from all of this?
Well, that's where the public perception piece comes in.
Okay.
The mandate does acknowledge that there might be some pushback, but it doesn't offer any real solutions.
Like they're just acknowledging that some people are going to be unhappy.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so what are some of the specific concerns that people are voicing? Well, think about the implications for minorities, for women, for LGBTQ plus individuals.
Okay.
These are groups that have historically faced marginalization and discrimination.
Right.
And they're worried that this is only going to make things worse.
So, for example, we were talking about the potential for discrimination based on family structure.
Right. Yeah.
How might that actually play out in real life?
Well, imagine a single mother trying to access social services or apply for a loan.
Okay.
If the government is actively promoting traditional family structures through policy and the tax code,
Right.
she might face additional hurdles.
Well.
She might even be denied outright.
And it's not just about access to services.
Right.
It's about feeling like you belong,
Exactly.
like you're a valued member of society.
If the government is sending the message that your family isn't normal or deserving,
Right.
that can have a real impact on your sense of self-worth.
It's othering people.
It is.
Yeah, and that feeling of exclusion can extend to other areas too. Think about the impact on LGBTQ plus individuals.
Right.
If the government rolls back protections
Yeah.
or actively promotes policies that are hostile to their community,
It's a real concern.
yeah, it sounds like a recipe for increased social tension.
At least.
Yeah, even violence potentially.
Yeah, it's possible.
And then you've got the scientists, the educators, the environmentalists
Right.
who are worried that their voices are going to be silenced.
They're seeing this as a direct attack on their fields,
Like they're being told they don't matter.
basically.
So scientists are worried about the defunding of climate change research, the ignoring of scientific evidence.
Yeah.
Educators are concerned about dismantling the Department of Education.
Right.
The potential for censorship in schools. Environmentalists are alarmed by the rollback of environmental regulations.
Absolutely.
It's a lot.
It is.
And then what about the international community?
Connected to the world.
How are they reacting to this more assertive America First approach?
There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty about what a Project 2025 America would look like. Allies are worried about trade wars, military conflicts, a breakdown in diplomacy.
So we're talking about potential isolation on the world stage, which could affect everything.
It could.
Trade security, climate change agreements.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It seems like Project 2025 is creating more problems than it's solving.
That's a fair assessment.
And it brings us back to those alternatives.
Right.
What are the other paths forward?
What are the other options?
Are there more moderate approaches
Yeah,
that might be more effective?
maybe.
So Project 2025 is like the tear it all down and start over approach. What does a more measured collaborative path look like?
Well, instead of dismantling the Department of Education,
Okay.
a more moderate approach might focus on reforms
Okay.
that address specific concerns.
Like what kind of concerns?
Things like funding disparities or teacher shortages,
Yeah.
while still preserving the fundamental role of public education.
So working within the system to make it better.
Instead of just blowing it up.
Right.
Exactly.
And when it comes to social issues,
Right.
like family structure, access to health care,
Yeah.
a more moderate approach might prioritize policies that support individuals and families, regardless of how they look,
Right.
what they believe.
Regardless of their composition.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a more inclusive approach,
Yes.
less judgment,
Less judgment.
that recognizes that American families come in all shapes and sizes.
Exactly.
And on the environmental front,
Yeah.
instead of just dismissing climate change,
Right.
a more moderate approach might focus on finding common ground between protecting the environment and economic growth.
Absolutely.
So acknowledging the science
Yeah.
and working together to find solutions.
That benefit everyone.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
And when it comes to foreign policy, a more moderate approach might emphasize diplomacy
Yeah.
Collaborating.
And working with allies.
instead of military buildup
Right.
and
It's
confrontation.
strength through partnership.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in all of these areas, a more moderate approach
Yeah.
would prioritize compromise,
Absolutely.
collaboration,
Collaborate.
finding solutions that work for the majority of Americans, rather than just pushing a specific agenda.
Right.
It sounds more pragmatic,
It does.
less divisive.
Less divisive.
But is that even feasible
That's the challenge.
in today's political climate?
It's a big one.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's dug in their heels,
It does.
unwilling to budge.
But you know, it's important to remember
What's that?
that most Americans aren't ideologues.
Right.
They just want solutions that work.
Regardless of which party.
It doesn't matter who comes up with them
Yeah.
as long as they work.
So there's hope for common sense.
I think so.
Okay.
But it requires leaders who are willing to listen, to compromise,
Right.
to find common ground.
Yeah.
And it requires citizens who are willing to hold those leaders accountable,
To make them do it,
right? To demand solutions that benefit everyone,
not just a select few.
not just a select few. Exactly.
That's a tall order,
It is.
but it's not impossible.
Not at all.
I mean, we've seen moments of bipartisanship,
We have
collaboration in the past.
even on really tough issues.
Yeah.
So it can be done.
Right. And those moments show us that it is possible to bridge that divide.
To find solutions that work.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of finding the will.
The courage to do it.
They're huge, yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Talk about some of the specific proposals in Project 2025.
Okay.
Starting with their plan to reform the federal bureaucracy.
Okay.
They talk a lot about shrinking government, reducing waste.
Yeah.
Is there any merit to those arguments?
I mean, there's always room for improvement when
Right.
it comes to government efficiency,
Right.
but Project 2025's approach
Yeah.
seems more about ideology
Then practicality.
than practicality.
What do you mean?
Well, they're talking about eliminating or drastically shrinking entire departments,
Oh, okay.
like Homeland Security,
Yeah.
Education, the EPA.
These are agencies that play pretty vital roles
We do.
in protecting us,
Yeah.
educating our kids, safeguarding the environment.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about trimming the fat here.
Right.
It's about fundamentally changing
Yeah.
what the government does.
Exactly.
And that's where the concerns come in.
That's right.
So, for example, they want to give more power to the states.
Yeah.
But what about issues that require a national response?
Like what?
like terrorism, climate change.
Yeah, you can't just leave that up to individual states.
Right, it's a national problem.
It is.
And then there's the question of accountability.
Right, who's in charge?
If you shrink the federal government who's making sure things are being done fairly.
And efficiently.
Right.
Yeah.
Oversight is crucial.
It is.
And it seems like Project 2025 is more about reducing oversight
than improving it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about deregulation.
Okay.
They want to roll back regulations across the board.
Yeah, in a lot of areas.
Particularly environmental protection, labor finance. What could happen if that actually goes through?
Well, regulations exist for a reason.
Yeah.
They protect people from harm,
Right.
ensure fair competition, safeguard the environment. Rolling back those regulations could lead to a lot of problems.
Like what?
Well, on the environmental front, you could see increased pollution, habitat destruction, climate change.
Okay.
On the labor front, you could see lower wages, fewer benefits, unsafe working conditions. And on the financial front, you could see risky lending practices, predatory scams, even another financial crisis.
So basically a return to the Wild West.
Kind of, yeah.
Every man for himself, corporations do whatever they want.
It's a step in that direction.
And it ignores the lessons we've learned from the past.
Like what?
Like the 2008 financial crisis, which was largely caused by deregulation.
In the financial industry.
And now they're advocating for a return.
To the same policies.
To the same policies that led to that.
Yeah.
So potentially catastrophic for the economy.
It could be.
Bad for the environment. Harmful for workers.
It's a lot of risk.
It's a lot of risk.
Yeah.
Hard to see much of an upside.
Well, the upside, according to them...
To project 2025.
Yeah, according to the mandate, is that it would unleash economic growth.
Create jobs.
But that's a pretty simplistic view.
It is.
That ignores the complexity of the situation.
Yeah, you can't just assume that deregulation automatically equals prosperity.
Right. There are a lot of other factors involved.
Absolutely.
And then there's the question of who actually benefits.
Right. Who wins?
Who wins from all of this?
It's likely to be corporations, wealthy individuals, while ordinary Americans bear the brunt of the consequences.
So trickle-down economics, which we've seen before.
Tried and failed.
Yeah, multiple times.
It's a pattern that we need to be wary of.
We do.
Okay, let's move on to their plans for social policy. They talk a lot about promoting traditional family values.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean in practice?
It's a bit vague.
Yeah.
But it seems to imply a preference for traditional nuclear families.
Okay.
Married mother and father, their biological children.
Okay, so what about families that don't fit that mold?
Right.
Single parents.
Yeah.
Blended families. Same-sex couples.
Right.
Families with adopted children.
It's not clear.
It's not clear at all.
But the mandate does hint at using the tax code to incentivize certain family structures and potentially penalize others.
So the government would be enforcing a certain moral code.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And it raises concerns about discrimination and intrusion into people's private lives.
Right. It's not the government's place to tell people how to live their lives.
Or what kind of family to have.
Exactly. And it just creates division.
Resentment.
Yeah. And then there's the abortion issue. The mandate is very clear. About their opposition to abortion rights.
Absolutely.
What are the implications of that?
Well, it could lead to more restrictive laws, reduced access to reproductive health care, even criminalization in some states.
Wow. And what about the impact on women's health and well-being?
That's a major concern because restricting access to safe abortion can force women to carry unwanted pregnancies to term.
Right.
Which puts their physical and mental health at risk.
Yeah.
It can also lead to unsafe abortions, which can be life-threatening.
So really dangerous consequences.
Yeah, potentially devastating.
For women.
Yeah, it's a very serious issue.
It is.
And one that we need to be talking about.
Okay, so we've talked about their plans for the bureaucracy, deregulation, social policy. Let's move on to education.
Okay.
They want to dismantle the Department of Education.
Right.
Replace it with a voucher system.
Yeah, big changes.
What are the potential problems with that?
Well, the Department of Education plays a really important role in ensuring equity and quality in education across the country. It sets standards, provides funding, enforces civil rights laws. Eliminating it would create chaos and exacerbate existing inequalities.
And what about the voucher system? Their argument is that it would give parents more choice and improve education overall.
That's a very debatable point because a voucher system could divert public funds to private schools,
Okay.
leaving public schools underfunded,
Right.
struggling to serve the majority of students.
Yeah.
It could also lead to segregation and discrimination.
How so?
Well, private schools aren't required to accept all students.
So it's not a guarantee of improved quality.
Not at all.
Okay.
And it's a very ideological approach that ignores the reality of how education actually works.
Right. Okay, let's talk about their foreign policy.
All right.
They seem to be advocating for a more assertive approach, more militaristic,
Yeah.
with a focus on China.
Yeah. China is definitely the target.
What are the risks of that?
Well, it could lead to increased tensions with China,
Okay.
even conflict,
Yeah.
which could have devastating consequences for everyone.
Right.
It could also alienate allies,
Yeah.
damage America's reputation.
The world stage.
Yeah.
And what about the financial cost?
Right. Military buildup is expensive.
It is.
It would require huge increases in spending,
Yeah.
which would likely come at the expense of other programs.
Like what?
Education,
Yeah.
healthcare infrastructure.
So potentially dangerous, costly, and damaging to America's standing in the world.
It's a very hawkish approach
Yeah.
that could have serious unintended consequences.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about Project 2025's plans for the bureaucracy, deregulation, social policy,
Yeah.
education, foreign policy.
It's a big plan. It's a big plan. And it seems like every step of the way,
Yeah.
they're pushing for these radical changes that carry some serious risks.
They do.
So is this really the best path forward for America?
That's the question.
Or is it a recipe for disaster?
It's a big gamble.
Yeah, it does feel like we're at a crossroads here.
It really does. This mandate lays out such a very specific vision.
Right. And the potential consequences are huge.
They are enormous.
Yeah, so it's not enough to just kind of point out the problems.
Oh, no.
We have to think about what the alternatives are.
Right. What does a different path look like?
Right. What does a different path look like?
Exactly. So imagine for a moment a different approach.
Okay.
Instead of trying to dismantle the federal government,
Yeah.
what if we focused on making it more efficient, more responsive to the needs of the people?
So instead of shrinking the Department of Education,
Right.
we invest in programs that address inequality,
Yeah.
improve teacher training, instead of slashing environmental regulations. We work with businesses to develop more sustainable practices.
Exactly. Find ways to protect the planet while still allowing for economic growth.
Right. So it's not just about shutting things down.
No, it's about finding solutions that work for everyone.
And what about on social issues?
Yeah,
Could we move away from this divisive rhetoric
I think so.
and focus on policies that support families, individuals, regardless of their background or beliefs?
It's about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
A more compassionate approach.
Exactly.
But is that realistic?
That's the million-dollar question.
Can we really expect that kind of cooperation,
Right.
compromise in this political climate?
It's a challenge, no doubt,
Yeah.
but I do believe it's possible.
Okay.
It requires a shift in mindset,
Yeah.
a willingness to listen to each other, to recognize that we're all in this together.
We're all Americans at the end of the day.
We are.
Yeah.
And it means holding our leaders accountable,
Making them work for us. It's exactly demanding that they work for the common good,
not just their own agendas.
not just their party.
Right.
It's about the country as a whole.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Project 2025,
Yeah.
what's the takeaway for our listener?
I think the most important thing is to be informed,
Okay.
be engaged, and be critical.
Don't just accept what you hear.
Right. Question everything.
Dig deeper.
Dig deeper. Form your own conclusions.
And remember, you have a voice.
You too have power.
You have the power to shape the future.
Whether it's through voting,
Voting.
volunteering,
Absolutely.
even just having these conversations.
just talking to each other.
Make your voice heard.
Make a difference.
Well said, the future isn't set in stone.
No, we shape it with the choices we make.
So choose wisely.
Choose wisely.
This has been a fascinating look at Project 2025.
It has been.
A little unsettling at times.
Yeah, for sure.
But thanks to you, our listener is armed with the knowledge to think critically about this plan.
What final thought would you leave them with?
I'd just say this, the future is not a spectator sport.
Okay.
Get involved, stay informed, and fight for the world you want to see.
The stakes are too high to sit on the sidelines.
They are.
Well, that's it for this deep dive into Project 2025.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the issues that matter